Um, we are in the third and final session of our course on sexual rights, and we have 140 participants on this course. Not everyone is able to participate here live today, but we will be recording the session and also providing the materials to those who cannot be here tonight. And I warmly welcome our international guests. We'll go straight to business. First speaker is Neil Datta, who is the Secretary of EPF, European Parliamentary Forum, which is an organization on a European level, bringing together parliamentarians from different European countries, working towards the common goal of making sure sexual rights, sexual and reproductive health is taken care of, not only here in Europe, but all over the world. And I'm a member of the executive committee of this organization. We also work very closely with our global partners with these goals. But Neil is here to talk about the backlash against sexual rights in Europe, and maybe give a few ideas on what kind of Finns and Finnish politicians do to tackle this, to give a picture of what we are actually dealing with. And the second session is, then we have guests from UNFPA, but I'll talk about that later because Neil has a bit of a schedule. So we have Neil's speech and a little Q&A for Neil, and then we'll go on with the program. But Neil, the floor is yours. Thank you so much for being here.
Okay. Thank you very much, Saara. It's a pleasure to be here with you. To be here on this webinar with you. And just so you know, I'm right now in Lisbon, where I've just finished 3 days of an internal workshop where we've been discussing anti-gender backlash issues. So it's very fresh in my mind now. And I'll need to leave all of you a little bit early because I'm catching a flight back to Brussels later on. So apologies for the discourtesy, but it's great to be here with you. I've prepared a PowerPoint, so I'm wondering if we can start projecting it. Yes, wonderful. So I've entitled it "Anti-Gender Movements in Europe," and I'll explain a little bit why it is that I've referred to it as such, rather than opposition or backlash. And we'll see it in the presentation. And my presentation, I think, should last about half an hour, maybe a bit less if I'm good. And like this, hopefully it can be fairly digestible. And the organizers have it, so I assume it can be made available to all the participants. Okay, so next slide, please. So as Saara has mentioned, we've seen increasing examples across Europe over the past 10, 12 years of what some people call backlash or contestation around a whole range of issues related to sexual reproductive health and rights. Now, this is while issues related to sexual reproductive health and rights have always been contested in some way, what we're seeing now in Europe is somehow different. And I'll explain a little bit how different it is. But already a few key things to remember about this is that it touches a whole range of different issues. So, and also it covers the whole continent. So it is not a Catholic thing in Southern Europe, in Italy or Spain. It is not an East European thing in Armenia or Russia or whatever. There's some form of anti-gender contestation in almost every country in Europe at the moment. And we can see that it touches a whole range of different issues. So just some examples that I have there. We have a contestation on abortion. This is an anti-abortion poster from Poland, comparing abortion to the Holocaust and Hitler. Next, below, we have large-scale demonstrations in France in 2013 against equal marriage for LGBT people. Now, these demonstrations gathered hundreds of thousands of people, and it was a big surprise even to many French people. And then we zoom out to Yerevan in Armenia, where we have a demonstration in front of the Armenian parliament against the Istanbul Convention on Violence Against Women. So somehow, violence against women has now also become controversial, and people are addressing it. So there's something happening here. Next slide, please. So when we take a look at what's happening, we see that those three examples, they're part of a much wider context of increased anti-gender activism across Europe. So there's been demonstrations or moves against the Istanbul Convention or laws protecting women from violence in a whole range of countries: Bulgaria, Croatia, Poland, Spain, etc. There's been a new range of restrictions on abortion proposed in a number of different contexts. Most recently in Poland, where the Constitutional Tribunal has made abortion almost virtually illegal. But there were also attempts back in 2013 and 14 to severely restrict abortion in Spain. And there were attempts to do things against abortion in at the Council of Europe, in the EU. And your neighbors in Sweden, the Sweden Democrats over the past 10 years have introduced at least 15 different attempts to restrict the Swedish abortion law. So even in, groovy progressive countries like the Nordic ones, this stuff is happening. And then also we have traditional marriage, LGBTQ rights, which are being contested. As I mentioned, in France, there were a whole range of referenda to put in national constitutions a definition of marriage as being that of a heterosexual, essentially patriarchal marriage, to stave off the possibility of equal marriage. Next slide. So who's behind this and what's behind this? Next slide. Well, first, what we can see is that there's a new movement that has emerged in Europe, which one thing that this new movement has in common is that they have collectively identified what they refer to as gender ideology as being the root cause of all the things that they oppose. So all these things that we're talking about, contraception, divorce, equal marriage, etc., it's all because of gender ideology. And the group that thinks this, it's essentially a specific set of actors composed of NGOs, think tanks, social media, even political parties, which is relatively new on the European landscape. We can date it back to approximately 10, 12 years. Now, and one thing which makes this different from the previous pro-life anti-abortion movements are three key features: professionalization, transnational networking, and the ability to generate, the ability to create new generations of elites willing to take on this ultra-conservative mobilization. And now, as I mentioned, there were pro-life anti-abortion organizations almost every European country. And it's on the back of these pre-existing organizations, which have existed since the 1970s, 80s, and 90s, depending on the country, that this anti-gender movement has built itself on. But one thing that they've done, in addition to professionalizing transnational network and creating a new generation of activists, is expanded their area of focus. No longer just abortion, but now all of sexual reproductive health and rights. So that includes contraception, divorce, assisted reproduction. Then a new area is LGBT rights, so equal marriage, but also co-adoption, non-discrimination, etc., whatever they can get away with, depending on the national context. Gender, and I put gender as such, because simply the word gender can provoke an allergic reaction by the anti-gender actors. You just need to put that anywhere and they'll be against it, which explains why they were active against the Istanbul Convention on Violence Against Women, because it includes the notion of gender in there. One area that's often overlooked is children's rights, and specifically, who has the final say in determining who determines the best interests of the child? Is that the state, or is that the family and the parents? And this is particularly relevant, for example, in Nordic countries, where there's a very advanced system of child protection, which is increasingly being contested. A primary target of this is the Norwegian Child Protective Services. And then also religious freedom. There is the idea of erecting the human right to religious freedom, which we all believe in and we're all in favor of, but somehow this is some superhuman right, which by invoking religious freedom, you can negate the human rights in other areas or other people. So my right to religious freedom is higher than your right as an LGBT person, or your right to non-discrimination as a woman or etc. Okay, so this is how it's being done. And one component, one thing that's happened is that a lot of these religious actors are religious in orientation, but they try to mask it in some way. And what's happened is a process of secularizing language. So they take old religious ideas, primarily from the Catholic thinking, and then they put them through a type of washing machine. And after that process, you have vocabulary that looks like human rights language, which then you can introduce into policy processes. Okay, next slide. So if we take a closer look at the three key features which make this anti-gender movement different than the previous pro-life movement. First, in terms of professionalization, so secularizing religious ideas. So for example, the notion of human dignity is often invoked, and one promotes human dignity through life, the protection of life from the moment of conception until natural death, protection of the family, traditional heterosexual patriarchal, and freedom, essentially religious freedom. Another aspect of this professionalization is that they are using exactly the same policy tools as human rights advocates. So for 20, 30 years, policy processes and human rights spaces were almost the private hunting ground of progressive groups, and the progressives group each advocated their own little advances, but basically they were not opposing anyone else's. You know, the LGBT did not go against women or environment or children or animals. But now we have a specific group which is going against the human rights of certain categories of people and using the same tools as human rights actors. And we see that they're occupying new discursive niches, so that being anti-abortion doesn't work that well in some places. So they create new arguments, such as demography, declining populations. What's the solution? Well, we should ban abortion. What's this with the LGBT? They're not producing children, etc. Another aspect is transnational networking. So they have set up their own international networks. They are able to buy Ryanair, EasyJet flights, meet in a 3-star hotel, and then have a strategizing meeting for 2-3 days, like everyone else. And we know that they do this because we've been to some of them, or we've had access to some of these documents. And this is where they organize and strategize different things. And then also generational renewal. So for a long time, we thought that the pro-life anti-abortion organizations, they were simply going to wither away because their leaders were old. We just need to wait for them to die, and then that's the end of that movement. But that's not the case. So they've set up their own ways of creating new elites, a bit like this training that you're organizing here, where they organize workshops, capacity building, and some have even set up permanent higher learning institutes and proper universities, which issue master's degrees in different things. And we see that often this is with the support of far-right political parties or actors and with religious institutions. Next slide. Here's an example of professionalization and transnational networking. One subset of these anti-gender actors in Europe come from the United States. And the United States actors, the Americans, they've set up offices in a number of different European cities, and they did not pick the beautiful cities of Europe, such as Paris or Madrid or Berlin. Instead, they came to Brussels and Strasbourg and Geneva. And the reason for that is that those cities, boring as they may be, they're also the seats of the human rights institutions in Europe, the EU, the Council of Europe, the United Nations. So we see they pick those locations strategically, and now they're engaging in all of the human rights bodies in Europe. The Americans also have this, they bring the specific skill set of litigation, of going before the courts in order to advance certain issues. And then we have transnationalization. They've set up their own networks. So political network of values brings together mainly politicians from Europe and Latin America to talk together about life, family, and freedom and dignity. The president of the political network of values, Katalin Novak, has just been elected 2 weeks ago, the president of Hungary. So they have access to high decision makers in their own setting. Next slide. Here's a picture from Agenda Europe network, when they met in Warsaw, just to show what one of their meetings looks like. It's a very banal meeting, and it is at Agenda Europe meetings where they strategized all the different referenda on traditional marriage that took place in Croatia, Romania, and different East European countries. It is from this network also that the toolkit to advocate against the Istanbul Convention on Violence Against Women was conceived and then deployed and then disseminated around Europe. Next slide. So if we go inside Agenda Europe a little bit and try to decrypt, to try to decipher who's there. So this Agenda Europe has been meeting annually since 2013 in different European cities. We haven't heard from them since 2019, but maybe they're gone, or maybe it's just COVID and everything is online and we don't have a trace of them. But if we take a look at who's involved, first there are the organizers, which we call Vatican surrogates. So these are people who are very close to the Vatican. For example, one of them was the legal advisor to the Holy See permanent representation to the United Nations in New York. So very close to the Vatican, but they're not church officials. They're the organizers of this. Then we can see different categories of people. One are political insiders. So they invite parliamentarians, government officials, people from inside the institutions of the European Union to their meetings, because they can find people like that. And in fact, you had some from Finland participating there. Then we have what's called the transnational luminaries. These are the ones who work in different international NGOs who come up with the big strategies. For example, what do we need to do to roll back abortion rights? How do we stop the Istanbul Convention? They are the ones that come up with the legal arguments, the discursive arguments, etc. And then you have the national level implementers. They're the ones who work at national level. They're able to analyze the situation in each country, and from that position, they're able to determine, right now is a good moment to go to run with this issue in Finland or Germany or etc. Or right now, this is coming up, we need to do something about it. And then finally, we have a fifth category. At first, we didn't know who they were. We were sort of perplexed. And then when we researched them, we realized that these are all very wealthy people. And so from that, we deduce that they're probably the ones who are bankrolling, who are financing either some of the organizations, some of the initiatives, etc. And we found project proposals for some of their work, so that there was a referendum in Slovakia about traditional marriage, and we found a proposal on how to organize a political an advocacy campaign against equal marriage in Slovakia, which they costed out at 340,000 euros for the whole country. Next slide. So if we then take a look at core ideas behind this group, next slide. So one thing that we found was a document which looks like it's a common manifesto, which they entitled Restoring the Natural Order. It's a 140-page document, which has the benefit of putting all of their ideas and thinking in one place. And so one of the first things that they say in Restoring the Natural Order is that their ideas are not based on religious beliefs, but on natural law. So we see here a first example of secularizing their thinking so that it doesn't appear overtly religious, until you realize that natural law itself is a very well-established and studied Catholic concept. And then they work on three issues: life, as I mentioned, conception to natural death, family, and then freedom, erecting religious freedom as a higher type of freedom than others. Next slide. If we then take a look at strategies, they themselves, in Restoring the Natural Order, say that they should not be afraid to be unrealistic or extremists. And they advise their members on how to do certain things. So first thing is that they need to position themselves as the new real victims. So for example, laws on violence against women penalize men. Installing or allowing for equal marriage in a society will penalize Christians if they don't believe in it. The next thing that they do is to frame their issue in terms of rights. So one good example here of how they frame issues in terms of rights are what are called conscious clauses, so or conscientious objection. So we have a new law which gives more human rights in certain countries. One way that they object to this is by invoking the right to conscientious objection, so that I should not be forced to perform abortion. I should not be forced to celebrate a gay marriage if it goes against my religious beliefs. This, as you can see, then has an impact on people's access to healthcare or other services which are guaranteed by law. Another strategy is to really go after what they consider their opponents, so to damage the abortion, the abortion lobby, the LGBT organizations, and really to try to defund them. And then another thing that they want to do is to become respected at international level. So over the past 10 years, we've seen a number of these organizations making several attempts in order to be recognized and obtain status at the UN, EU, Council of Europe, or the different courts. So a number of them have UN ECOSOC status. One thing I don't understand is that a number of them, especially some of the American ones, are allowed to submit legal briefs, amicus briefs, to the European Court of Human Rights. And they're doing this on a regular basis. Next slide. If we take a look at what they want to do, in their Restoring the Natural Order, this document from Agenda Europe, they have a 10-page action list of what it is that they want to do. And now I've tried to summarize it very briefly here and just pull out some examples. But just if we take a look at some of their issue areas, they have things that they want to prohibit. The things that then they are prohibited, they have an idea of what to replace them with, and then how to do certain other things. So just in terms of marriage and family, one thing they want to do is repeal all divorce laws. No more divorce. One thing that they want to promote adoption is what they call anti-sodomy laws. So laws modeled on what's happening in the Russian Federation against LGBT people. And then finally also defund the different lobbies, LGBT or abortion lobbies as they call them. And you have this also in contraception abortion, prohibit pharmaceutical contraceptives, abortion ban, etc. Next slide, please. So here's an example of some of their documents where they, that I mentioned, that they cook up to go, and here I've used the example of the Istanbul Convention, where they, these are the documents that they used to argue against the Istanbul Convention. And these were submitted to the courts in several countries. And in Bulgaria, for example, they were successful, so that Bulgaria was meant to ratify the Istanbul Convention. The procedure had started, then a whole campaign came out of nowhere, in part thanks to these anti-gender actors who had all the legal arguments. They submitted these to Bulgarian parliament, to the Bulgarian courts, so that it ended up with the Bulgarian high courts deciding that the Istanbul Convention was contrary to the country's constitution. So they're able to have impact. Next slide. If we then take a look at funding, okay, because the question of, how is this movement financed, where does it come from, always comes up. And we've done a bit of research on this. Next slide. So what we did is we took a look, we tried to identify all the anti-gender organizations we could find in Europe. We ended up with 120 of them across all of geographic Europe. And then we just did something very simple. We simply tracked down their financial details, their annual reports, their budgets, and things like this. And we were able to find this information for 54 of these organizations. They ended up being NGOs, foundations, religious organizations, political parties. And then when we add all of this up, we find that this anti-gender movement has at least $700 million to its name over a 10-year period from 2009 to 2018. So that's a significant amount of money, but it's already, it's an underestimation of what they have. We then go deeper into this. What we find is that this represents an increase by 4 over the 10-year period. So if you have 4 times more money, you can do a lot more than when you didn't have 4 times the money. And then we find 3 geographic origins. One is the Russian Federation. So that's very, very important given the actual situation now. This comes mainly from 2 Russian oligarchs who have been banned from the EU since 2014. So they're not even the oligarchs that have been banned just a few weeks ago. They were banned a long time ago because they were specifically involved in the terrorist and paramilitary activities of the Donbass and Lugansk regions and the annexation of Crimea. So that's one source of money that that is there, Russian Federation. Another source of money is the United States. It's the smallest amount, but still 81 million. And as I said, that's oriented towards litigation organizations. And then the biggest amount comes from Europe itself. And that's mainly economic and social elites. So rich people, corporations, etc. Next slide. So here's an example of where does this money come from in a European context. So we can see, you know, some of them are able to get money through through political activism. Others in the more illiberal countries of Europe, such as Hungary and Poland, an alternative NGO ecosystem has emerged, which is ultra-conservative and is being directly funded by these illiberal governments. Next slide. So if we then take a look at results, and I just have a few more slides left. Next slide. So overall, in terms of results, we've seen that in some countries, they have been able to contribute to significant setbacks, such as Poland, Hungary, and Bulgaria is another example. Another thing that, another result we can attribute to them is that they have been able to stop proposed or anticipated progress on certain key issues. So some countries have not been able to ratify the Istanbul Convention. If we go back to France, one of the first examples I gave, even though France went with equal marriage, the original bill was meant to include access to assisted procreation for lesbian couples. This did not happen. It's only now being discussed. And also equal marriage was being discussed in some countries, but that was put on hold in some places. At the level of the EU, of the European institutions, we have been able to neutralize them. So basically, we've been able to raise awareness about who these are, who these anti-gender actors are, what they're trying to do. And in fact, a number of them have simply left Brussels or Strasbourg. But they're still ambitious. One of the founders of one of the Polish anti-gender organizations was nominated by the government of Poland to be a judge on the European Court of Human Rights a year ago. He was stopped, but imagine the connections that you have to be nominated by your government to sit on the European Court of Human Rights. And we see that even though they're out of the, not out, but they're limited in the European institutions, what's happened is that they haven't gone away. They've simply moved. So from Brussels and Strasbourg or Geneva, they've left, but now they're in Warsaw, Budapest, even London and Madrid. And from there, they're much stronger. They've created their own little national fortresses from which to extend influence. Next slide. So if we can see a little bit the migration of anti-gender as a project, we can see that first of all, it started out as a religious project. So it was really religious communities, mainly the Catholic ones, but eventually the Protestant communities and now Orthodox communities also taking this up. From the religious actors, it then transitioned into civil society. And so these are these NGOs that I was talking about. From there, from civil society, we see that then it's been picked up by a number of political actors. So individual politicians, but then whole political parties are now centered around anti-gender thinking. And we can see an evolution there also, where at first, anti-gender actors were really targeting the Christian Democrats, the center right of the political spectrum, because they had some support there. What we saw is that and those political parties affiliated with the European People's Party, EPP, what we saw there is that they had some success, but those political parties were only able to block certain advances, like, for example, IVF for lesbian couples, but they were not able to initiate things, you know, a ban on abortion and things like this. So the anti-gender actors, especially in some countries, they've migrated to the alt-right or far-right political parties, who are a lot more assertive in their policy claims. And then finally, we see that now anti-gender has become an affair of states. So some countries, some governments are making this a state policy, and we're seeing that they're putting the resources behind this. So they're engaging in anti-gender soft diplomacy or hard diplomacy even. And we see this coming from Hungary, Poland, the United States under the Republicans, Russia, and to a certain extent, Turkey and Brazil. And we see that all these different types of anti-gender projects, religious, civil society, political, and state projects, at the moment, they all coexist, and they offer the possibility for different alliances between different actors in different contexts. Next slide. So this is my final slide. Yeah, next slide, please. Yeah, so where do we stand now? We can see that anti-gender is now a permanent feature of the European landscape. Okay, so it's not going to go away soon. A second point I want to make is that while they're strong, they're not as strong as they appear. Now we understand them better. We know their weaknesses. We've chased them out of national institutions. And so we've shown that we can do something. A bit like, I don't know if it's the best of analogies, but I think to me, they're a bit like the Russian army. Before we thought that it was the strongest army, they were really, really bad. But now we see they can't even get Ukraine right. Okay, they're not nearly as strong as what we had feared, and I think that's something we need to keep in mind. We've seen also that the existence of this anti-gender movement has revitalized a big number of the progressive camp, so that now there's discussions moving forward. There's a better awareness of the obstacles that lay ahead, and also a better understanding that there's also a better understanding that what we thought had been guaranteed in terms of our human rights are not as secure as we thought, and we need to better guarantee them. So, for example, one such example is the suggestion of French President Macron to include abortion in the EU Fundamental Rights Charter. That's something that really should be explored. And then finally, the Russian invasion of Ukraine, it's proving to be very embarrassing for many of these anti-gender actors, because a certain number of them were getting funding from Russia, or they were very overtly pro-Russian, pro-Putin. Putin was a bit their idol, and now it's proving to be quite embarrassing. Next slide. Yeah, I have this slide and one more, and then that's it. So just some concluding thoughts. We know that anti-gender actors, they're most impactful when they're able to strike an ambush. So when people are not prepared for them. And for example, that was Bulgaria, which didn't have a tradition of this. They were meant to ratify the Istanbul Convention and then lost everything because they lost precious weeks and months trying to figure out what was happening. We also know that the anti-gender actors, they fear the light of day. They don't like scrutiny on their funding, on their leadership, on their associations, because usually once you scratch beneath the surface, you'll find that there's lots of dodgy stuff going there. And they really don't expect people to look into this. Whereas like us, they all have international connections. They've all been to meetings. And sometimes with this group of actors, their connections are not very good. And it's important to showcase that. Next slide. And so here's really my final slide. So what can we do? So really identify the anti-gender actors in your own context, bearing in mind that this can change a lot. One of the features of this movement is that it's very flexible and adaptive. So they can launch new initiatives. If it works, it works. If it doesn't, they'll drop it and then move on to something else, but already identifying who they are. And as someone said in the chat, the fact that Alliance Defending Freedom International is present or is active in Finland with your former minister and her court case, that's already an important step. Monitor the anti-gender actors in their areas of activity. In many cases, they know that abortion or equal marriage or LGBT rights they can't do much on that. They'll have to find new entry points. So we need to see what are they doing, and is that being used as an entry point in terms of undermining different areas of human rights. Another one is to create a community of allies nationally and transnationally to share info, intelligence, and developments, and just to have a sounding board about what's happening and who's doing what, etc., because it's too much for any one person to know. A fourth aspect, fourth and fifth, they go hand in hand, is really to warn your decision makers and your media, so that when these things happen, they need to understand this is not a local, national phenomenon. This is part of a transnational movement to undermine human rights and in some cases even democracy. And whatever is happening in a specific national context has happened somewhere else before. That's guaranteed. And so there's lessons to be learned there. And already it changes one's mindset if you know that what's happening, for example, in Finland, well, it was tried out in Croatia or Portugal 2 years ago, and by the same set of actors. That can change the discussion around certain things. And the decision makers and the media, they want to understand what's happening, and we have this explanation for them that we can provide. And I think that's it. Next slide. Yep, so I'll end here. So thank you very much for your attention. I hope I didn't bore you too much. And if you'd like to go into more detail, we went into more detail into 3 reports, which you can find on our website. Restoring the Natural Order, Tip of the Iceberg on funding, and then Modern Day Crusaders about what's happening around a specific network very active in Poland. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Neil. Always alarming but inspirational to hear your thoughts on and sort of recent news on this topic. Now, for the participants, if you have some questions you'd like to tell or ask Neil, then you can write them on the chat. You can also write them in Finnish if that's easier for you, and I can translate them. We have just a few minutes before Neil has to leave for the airport, but then maybe I'll start. Someone commented here specifically on this Päivi Räsänen case, that actually one of these organizations who is very, very connected to this movement was helping her. And I think from the point of view of the parliament in Finland, this anti-gender movement is influencing actually the discussion in the parliament very greatly. It's quite subtle. It's not as sort of obvious as it is maybe in Poland or somewhere else. It's more sort of between the lines and very kind of just changing the view of the conversation from what we've sort of gotten used to. Also positioning as true victims. That was a very, very good sort of thing to point out, because that's something I see in my work quite often. I think some of these organizations are active in Finland, as you said, and there are Finnish politicians involved in them, sort of these religious organizations, for example. I think there's probably sort of different levels of engagement, so that probably some of these politicians or decision makers that are participating sort of don't know what they are involved in, or thinking they are maybe participating in something totally harmless. How would you say, what's the best way to raise awareness among those people who are sort of not very progressive, but maybe don't want to be on the part of the anti-gender movement if they would believe that this exists? So how to sort of bring those people back on the right side, and maybe not on the progressive side, but maybe on the neutral side, and see sort of this mess that is behind these actors.
Yeah, I mean, in relation to that, one thing that's proven, some ideas based on what I've seen happen in some other countries, is one is showing what's the real agenda behind certain things, so that if they go down a certain road in advocating for a certain issue, then this leads to other things, so that so that's been one way of addressing it. Another one has been to sort of like highlight the unsavory or the dodgy connections of some of their international friends. And for example, this worked very well in Sweden, where there was this one Christian Democrat MP and MEP, he was called Lars Adaktusson. He was involved in some Agenda Europe meetings, and he was there with some of the different Agenda Europe people. When the Swedish press was able to establish this, they released this to the Swedish media, and it cost them a few points in the elections. This is not acceptable in Sweden, and since then we saw that this guy has distanced himself from his anti-gender friends in other European countries. So I think that's something that can work. But what you said also is that sometimes they may not know what they're getting involved in is very important, because one of the things that we've seen that they do, some of the anti-gender actors, is to create parliamentary breakfast prayer clubs, which look very nice. Okay, so it's simply all the Christians, they get together at breakfast over a croissant and an orange juice and a coffee. They have a little prayer and things like this. But what we see is that they have guest speakers coming to these events. When we see who the guest speakers are, then we can see what the real agenda is. One of the guest speakers at the European Parliament prayer breakfast was one of the main spokespersons for La Manif pour tous. This is the homophobic movement in France against equal marriage. So when you have that person coming to speak to you, you know what the agenda is. And so I think revealing the different forum for how they socialize people onto their ultra-conservative agenda can be useful as well.
Yeah, we have those breakfasts here in Finland as well. I always get invited, or sometimes get invited. I haven't participated, but I've seen the invitations, so they exist here as well. Mm-hmm. Thank you so much, Neil, for being here and for enlightening us with your views and information. We're gonna let you go now, and all the strength to your work battling these issues, and happy to have you as an ally for all the people here also combating these.
Yeah, thank you very much, and thank you for the invitation and opportunity to share this with you. It's really been a pleasure. So thank you, and
thanks.
Good rest of the session. Okay.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you so much. Bye. So next we have speakers from the UNFPA. We have Daniel Enger, team lead of adolescent and youth, and Ilya Zhukov, Global Focal Point CSE. You can maybe tell more about your responsibilities and yourself, but speaking about bodily autonomy, securing the rights and choices for all. For those of you who are not familiar with UNFPA, maybe you can share a few words about about the organization as well. But UNFPA is the United Nations Sexual and Reproductive Health Agency, so a very core actor in this field, and very good. We have very good cooperation with UNFPA. UNFPA does some very valuable, important work in crisis areas as well. So a lot of things where not many people, not many organizations are able to work. So UNFPA provides help for those organizations in very difficult areas. But now I'll give the floor to you, and thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you, Sarah. It's really my pleasure to be here and represent UNFPA. I think you explained very well what UNFPA is, the United Nations Reproductive Health, Sexual and Reproductive Health Agency. We focus on population, we focus on sexual and reproductive health and rights, on maternal health, on young people, on gender, on social norms, and we also support countries in their censuses. So that's broadly our mandate, which comes from the ICPD, the International Conference on Population and Development, in 1994, which gave UNFPA its mandate, and which is really groundbreaking international agreement on securing rights and choices for all in sexual and reproductive health and rights. I'm here today with, my name is Daniel Engel. I'm the team lead, as you said, of the Adolescent and Youth team in the Sexual and Reproductive Health branch of the Technical Division, which is based here in New York at the headquarters of UNFPA. And we focus mainly on one of our big constituencies, which is adolescent and young people. But I'm here today also with my colleague Ilya Zhukov, who is our global focal point on comprehensive sexuality education. And I have with me as well my colleague Francelle Toredli, who is will not be presenting, but is here in case she's working on comprehensive abortion care. And so if there's any discussion or questions about abortion, Francelle is here to help out with that. So what we would like to propose to you, what we do today in this 40 minutes or 45 minutes which we have left, is that I'm giving you a quick overview about the concept of bodily autonomy, how it relates to SRHR, and how UNFPA addresses or supports countries to ensure bodily autonomy for all. And then we'll zoom in on one specific issue, which is comprehensive sexuality education. And I think that ties very well also into the discussion we just had with Neil on opposition and opposition to gender, etc., because CSE is an area, so CSE being comprehensive sexuality education, is kind of at the forefront, like the first of our agenda items, which is normally attacked by opposition to our mandate. So if we can have the presentation up on the screen now, please. I don't know who's presenting. There we go. Go to the screen. Thank you very much. So as I said, the presentation today will be on bodily autonomy, securing rights and choices for all. Next slide. So first of all, what is bodily autonomy? We define bodily autonomy as the power and the autonomy to make choices over one's body and future. And last year in 2021, UNFPA issued our flagship publication, which is the State of the World Population, which we issue every year. And last year we focused that publication on bodily autonomy. And in the process, we gathered testimonies from all around the world about bodily autonomy. And this is what I would like to share with you now. Let's see if that video works. Yes.
Maybe try to click the video, Laura.
Yeah, I'm sorry, it's not working.
I can put the link quickly in the
Yes, that would be great.
Can put the link in the chat if that works.
Will you show it from the YouTube link, Laura, or?
Yes, so I'd have to start a new share. So yeah, just a second.
Yeah, thanks.
If this is too difficult, Laura, we can also just move on. I just felt it was nice for you to hear what people themselves had to say about bodily autonomy, and what are the different aspects we are looking at when we talk about bodily autonomy. Laura, just checking in with you. There we go. Can we go back to the beginning, perhaps, and with the sound?
Yeah, 1 second.
Okay.
Na verdade, eu ainda não sabia bem o que é isso da autonomia corporal.
This is a basic human rights, not to be harassed, to live with dignity. She cried. She said, they raped me.
Y eso surge a partir de un abuso, de una violación, como que mi cuerpo no pertenecía a mí mismo.
This is torture. This is against a human rights. This is against the dignity of this woman.
Le vrai problème est que ces tests n'ont pas de fondement médical.
Families collude with medical professionals to sterilize them.
Жить не в своем теле — это ужасно. Избивали, типа, каждый день. Типа, чтобы выбить трансгендерность человека.
Son obrigadas, por ejemplo, a tener relaciones sexogenitales.
Ainda que a mulher não tenha vontade ou prazer sexual na altura, ela sente-se obrigada a fazer porque o parceiro quer.
That family, they killed their daughter.
Sometimes they have been killed because of not bleeding after the first intercourse.
We have knowledge gap, we have misconceptions.
A comprehensive sex ed curriculum would be critical.
In many cultures, it's very stigmatizing, even go to a reproductive health service facility.
Women and girls reported over and over again things that their male partners did to make it impossible for them to control their bodies and particularly to control their using contraception.
Es muy común, ¿no? Legislar de una forma que no habla con las comunidades de las cuales está pues, cambiando la legislación.
When our laws and our policies are vague and our language is ambiguous, it doesn't provide for survivors or people who are experiencing this level of abuse or violence.
Creo que eso me llevó a saber que soy dueño de mi cuerpo.
Memang murni tubuh saya adalah otonomi saya. Saya adalah hak saya.
Thank you, Laura. And now we can go back to the presentation. So I put the link to the video also in the chat if you want to watch it again at your leisure and perhaps in a quite slightly better quality. You also can find the swap of last year still on UNFPA's website, which goes much more into depth on what bodily autonomy is, and you can read the testimony of the different people featured in the video as well. Can we go back to the presentation now, Laura? The next slide, please.
Yes, I'm sorry, I have a bit of a problem with this, with the video.
Sorry. Let's go to the next. Yeah, just go to the next, to slide 4 exactly. Yes. So how do we measure bodily autonomy? I mean, it's a concept, as I said, which is slowly emerging, and the world is beginning to create measurements, which is very encouraging. The international community has agreed to measure bodily autonomy as part of the Sustainable Development Goals. If you go to the next slide. So we at UNFPA track bodily autonomy through 2 SDG indicators. The first one is the indicator 5.6.1 and the other one is 5.6.2. The first indicator looks at 3 main questions which are posed to a woman. And these are: who is usually making decisions about healthcare? Second, who usually makes the decision on whether or not you should use contraception? And the last one asks a woman no to her husband or her partner if she doesn't want to have sexual relations. The next slide. The next one indicator looks at laws and regulations that guarantee full and equal access to women and men to sexual and reproductive health care, information and education. And this covers maternity care, but also contraception and family planning, comprehensive sexuality education, and sexual health and well-being. The indicator also measures if there are supportive laws that exist or if there are restrictions such as age limitations, age of consent, spousal permissions, etc. Next slide. Of what we see that only 55% of women are fully empowered to make choices over their own healthcare, contraception, and the ability to say yes or no to sex. That's the first indicator which we are tracking. So roughly half of women around the world report that they have this ability. Only 71 countries have laws which guarantee access to overall maternity care. And you see on the screen what that includes. That includes maternity care, but also life-saving commodities, access to comprehensive abortion care and post-abortion care. And if I say 71% of countries, this is out of 79 countries which have been responding with data which was complete. About 80% of countries have laws supporting sexual health and well-being, and about 56% only of the countries which reported had laws and policies which supported comprehensive sexuality education. We go to the next slide. While these measures are critical, they only offer a very little glimpse into the bodily autonomy of the people around the world. The first indicator, for instance, only has data from around 57 countries. The questions too is limited because they are asked to a subset of women only, and that is women who are cohabiting and who are in cohabiting relationships, or those who are married. And so it cannot really provide a complete picture of women in reproductive decision-making, of women's reproductive decision-making. And in particular, it also does not give us a good idea of adolescents' bodily autonomy, for instance. The second indicator is also limited. The presence of laws and regulations does not always mean that these rules are followed and implemented. And also the indicator does not cover laws governing other important matters which in relation to bodily autonomy, such as rape within marriage or gender identity, sexual activity, etc. In addition, there are many bodily autonomy issues which remain hotly contested and which are unresolved by international law, such as voluntary sex work and also abortion. So still some work to do. Now, how do we realize autonomy for all, bodily autonomy for all? Can you go to the next slide? As UNFPA, we feel that we must and we can realize bodily autonomy for all. The first step, of course, is to articulate and affirm the concept itself, because too many people are unaware that they even have the right to make choices of their own bodies and futures. But also, there are programmatic and policy interventions which can help ensure an improved bodily autonomy for people around the world. The first area in which UNFPA is active is, next slide, is in the health service provision. Health providers have a critical role to play in upholding and affirming the bodily autonomy of those who are seeking information and care. Patients need to be aware of their rights and they must be asked for informed consent. So here UNFPA supports countries to develop medical guidelines, training on legal requirements, and specific gender sensitivity trainings that help healthcare providers actively support the bodily autonomy of patients. We are also the world's largest single largest provider of donated contraceptives for in developing countries. In 2019, these contraceptives empowered women to make decisions that helped avert an estimated 14 million unintended pregnancies and around 4 million unsafe abortions. Next slide. The next area of work is social norms. In order to enforce and uphold bodily autonomy for everyone, social norms must become more gender equitable. Progress depends on women's opportunities for livelihood and leadership roles, and men willing to step away from dominating roles that privilege their power and choices at the expense of women's power and choices. In the area of social norms, UNFPA helps countries and communities to challenge and change unequitable social norms. We promote policies, programs, and legislation which is designed to end child marriage and female genital mutilation, together with UNICEF, may I add. These programs encourage communities to abandon harmful stereotypes, embrace respectful, healthy relationships, and support the human rights of all people everywhere. UNFPA also acts to protect survivors of gender-based violence, providing a combination of essential services, including in humanitarian crisis. And I think, Sarah, you mentioned that in your introduction. Indeed, GBV in emergencies is one of UNFPA's biggest interventions when it comes to humanitarian crisis, including the one which you're just witnessing in Ukraine. Next slide. The third area is education. Education indeed is key. We have seen that women who are with more education are more likely to make their own decisions about many things in their life, but also about contraception and healthcare, and they are able to say no to sex. UNFPA supports countries to implement comprehensive sexuality education programs in and out of school, with a focus on those hardest to reach. And as I said in the beginning, my colleague Ilya is here to tell us much more about the specific focus of our work. We know that CSE not only helps to prevent unintended pregnancy and sexually transmitted infection, it also equips individuals to advocate for themselves. And the next.
Yep.
Next slide.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, I'll get to you in a second. Just give me one more slide, and that is laws. I already mentioned that earlier. Laws have a significant impact on women's rights, gender equality, and sexual and reproductive health and rights. Niall also presented that very, very clearly in his presentation, how important laws are and how much they also focus by the opposition for that same reason. What UNFPA does in the area of laws and policies, we help countries to align laws with globally agreed human rights principles and commitments, and help countries revise them for gender responsiveness, and I might add age responsiveness as well, with a focus on the younger generations as well. In some countries, we work directly with the judiciary and also the police to ensure that they're aware of these laws and principles, and we build capacity for adequate implementation. And I think my last slide before I hand over to my colleague Ilya is an overview of our strategic plan, which we just launched this year. A new strategic plan. Is that the next slide, please? You can see we have three main outcomes, all of them focusing on issues of SRHR and bodily autonomy, zero unmet need for family planning, zero unmet need for preventable maternal deaths, and zero gender-based violence and harmful practices. And we focus on policy and accountability, quality of care and services, gender and social norms, data system and evidence, humanitarian action, and youth and adolescents. And in the area of youth and adolescents, where we have a specific focus on adolescents' bodily autonomy, under that comes our work on comprehensive sexuality education, which I'm very pleased that we have our global focal point for CSC here today, which is Ilya Sukov, works in our team and who will give you an overview of the work we are doing, in particular to build bodily autonomy and rights and choices for all adolescents through education programs, while at the same time also trying to push back any opposition to the mandate areas of UNFPA. Over to you, Ilya.
Yeah, thank you very much, Daniel. Good morning, good afternoon, colleagues. So, you know, when I was listening to Neil data, I was thinking probably it's a little bit weird that after this, you know, this presentation about opposition and about support which Russia provides to SRHR position in Europe and in the world, it's a little bit weird that Russian citizens will speak about SRHR, young people, adolescents, about comprehensive sexuality education. So that's why I just decided to start my my presentation with one thing to tell you that probably this restrictive environment in the country, in my country, in Russia, in terms of human rights and specifically in terms of sexual reproductive health and rights, maybe that's defined when I was a teenager, gay guy in the small town in Russia. It defined my commitment to be activist, and then it defined my professional interests, being a medical doctor in SRHR of adolescents and now in comprehensive sexuality education. And as I know, you already within this like series of these Zoom calls or meetings, you already discussed comprehensive sexuality education. So maybe there is no need to go in depth. But however, I would like to spend like 5-6 minutes at the beginning just to remind the basics about comprehensive sexuality education, because it will be important for us when we discuss opposition and when we discuss specific examples from countries and regions where we work. So we agreed with Laura that I will share my screen right now to show you one more video, which will tell you about CC. Can you see my my screen right now? Let's check if you can hear the sound.
Today's lesson is about gender stereotyping. This is health and family life education class.
When we talk about comprehensive sexuality education, we're talking about a really wide range of subjects, of topics, and of themes.
Comprehensive sexuality education will be key to ensure that the world can reach the SDGs, including SDG 3 on health, SDG 4 on education, and 5 on gender equality.
It's said that if you close your eyes to the fact, then you have to learn through accidents. And that is what we want to avoid. We have issues of defilement and rape because parents are still shrouded in the old adage that you don't talk about sex.
Teenage pregnancy, unwanted pregnancy, denial of women's control over their own bodies, all of that is something that in an age-appropriate way, children should be learning about.
How do we feel about these stereotypes? Are they accurate?
When we come together around this subject, it really enables us to be empathetic and to actually realize the importance of CSE.
Young people have a right to information that's not only life-saving, but it's going to add to their ability to have a healthy, pleasurable sexuality.
Investing in sexual and reproductive health and rights, including through comprehensive sexuality education, unleashes a girl and women's potential.
Comprehensive sexuality education also promotes nonviolence and respect for bodily integrity and consent. We have a unique opportunity to have education as an entry point to address patriarchy.
It's okay to have beliefs, but when we start to impose a lot of those beliefs on other persons to the point that it limits who they are as a person, then it becomes a problem.
Especially for girls, it's important to empower them and equip them with life skills-based education so that they feel very confident and empowered to be the agents of change.
We're all from different countries, but there are so many similarities, and it's really to empower students to make better decisions.
We have an important task in front of us to hold our policymakers accountable to ensure that we leave no one behind when it comes to comprehensive sexuality education.
There are governments, there are ministers, there are people who want to work on this because they know it's the right thing to do. You can have more gender equal societies, young people with better health, and that we're all contributing and working towards a common goal in partnership together.
Our joint work on comprehensive sexuality education is the best example how UN agencies can work together.
Governments, whether they're left or right, they should consider the necessity of young people because the human body is not changing.
I think that it's time that we start to identify national, regional and global champions for CSE.
As the Secretary General's Envoy on Youth, I will be a strong advocate for comprehensive sexuality education.
When young people are equipped with knowledge on how to transform these values into practice, we make quite a big step forward towards gender equality.
Yes, here we are. Please, yeah, next slide, please. So that was the video from the launch of the United Nations International Technical Guidance on Sexuality Education, which you can see now on your screens. And this guidance, together with complementary one with a specific focus on out-of-school CSE, these are two main publications, two main guidance, which we use in our work when we promote and implement sexuality education programs in the field. You see the definition of CSE on your screen from this international technical guidance. I just would like to remind you the main characteristics of sexuality education. First of all, it should be scientifically accurate. In our work, we promote only those sexuality education with the content which is based on facts and evidence. Second of all, it should be incremental. We recommend and we promote to continue to start the continuing comprehensive sexuality education from early age. So very often we have questions when people or experts or stakeholders ask us or mass media, what age we should start comprehensive sexuality education. So now our position in UN to start it from the age of 5. Of course, it should be age and developmentally appropriate. And here, very important thing that in our first guidance in 2008, we used another word for this. We said it should be age sensitive and developmentally sensitive, but we don't use this word in this context anymore because in this context, it has some kind of the negative meaning, and we saw that within years, conservative governments use it as a reason not to do sexuality education because they always told us, oh, it's not always, often told us, oh, it's too sensitive for the age. But it's not sensitive if we do it on appropriate way accordance with the age group where our students are. Sexuality education should be curriculum-based. When we are talking about curriculum-based sexuality education, we mean that it should be written curriculum. So of course, it's not about like random lectures or random classes. So when facilitators or teachers comes like once a year to speak about something related to sexuality. Comprehensive sexuality education should be based on human rights and should be based on gender equality. very important that comprehensive sexuality education is transformative because it's empower young people and communities, and it's promote critical thinking of adolescents and young people. Also, the key word here is comprehensive, because it should cover the range of topics related to sexuality. It's because sexuality, as you know, it's not only about sex, it's about partnership, it's about human body, it's about safety, it's about prevention of GBV, it's about different aspects of reproductive health. So all these characteristics are important, and unfortunately, many of those who oppose to comprehensive sexuality education, they forget about it because many parents think that it's only about sex, but in fact it's not. As I said, we have two guidance which guide us in implementation of in-school and out-of-school CSE. Why sexuality education out of school is important? Not only because many children don't have access to school, but it's also one of the very important reasons. But it's also important in countries where some topics cannot be discussed or delivered in schools. So when it's not like socially appropriate or culturally appropriate. So in this case, out of school settings provide more flexibility for teachers and for students, and it also allows us to reach out to those who further left behind. So if you go to our UNFPA website and check this guidance for out-of-school CSE, you can see that we work with LGBTIQ plus adolescents and young people to deliver CSE to them out of school, or indigenous young people in humanitarian settings, etc., etc. But to give you like example how we may adjust sexuality education for specific groups of young people, I would like to show you the next slide where we can see one of the group of young people with disabilities. First of all, talking about young people with disabilities, we should say that there is no so there are some general recommendations, but young people with disabilities, it's a very diverse group. And in our recommendations, we to develop our recommendations, we use WHO classification of disability, and there are different recommendations in terms of content and methodology to deliver it to young people with physical disability, intellectual disability, sensory disability, or psychosocial disability. In terms of general recommendation, why I stop here, why I'm speaking about it, so because I know that Finland in its work and support of SRHR have a specific focus on young people with disabilities, so I decided that maybe it will be interesting for you. So in case of this group of young people, we recommend that it's very important to involve adults, and not only parents, but all those who play significant role around child or around young person, who play this significant role in their life. Parents, as I said, caregivers, personal care attendants, counselors, teachers, and other professionals they encounter through their life. For children and young people with disabilities who are not in schools, parents and caregivers play an even more important role in delivering sexuality education. It's important to adapt programs to address the needs of every participant. What do I mean here? So it is important to assess needs of a young person because many young people, they have multiple disabilities. And for example, young people, young person with physical disability can have intellectual disability, and delivery of the curriculum of sexuality education will be adapted to the specific needs of specific participant. Also, it doesn't matter what disability young person have. First, the facilitator, the teacher, the educator should ask the young person how it's more comfortable for the young person with disability to attend sexuality education class. Is they will be more comfortable to do it in a bigger group or in smaller group? Is it okay for the young person with disability to attend the class together with other young people like without disabilities? So also it's important to understand how to address the young person, because it's like our classification, our language. We can think that it's very tolerant and inclusive, but it can affect other persons. So again, the rule here is universal. If we don't know, or if we have some concerns, the best way to ask the young person with disability how they want us to address them. In terms of content and program, it's important, very important with young people with disabilities to discuss boundaries. And it's important to ensure that facilitators have access to support and referral mechanism, specifically related to in case when in case of abuse or violence or sexual exploitation. So teachers, facilitators, caregivers who provide sexuality education need to know where to report if they think that something related to these issues happening with a young person. And as I said, so unfortunately I don't have too much time. So for each group of disability, as you can see on this slide, there are specific recommendations how to deliver and what additional content to include in sexuality education program. Next slide, please. On this slide, you see the young man from Malawi. And of course, usually when we have interventions or we're speaking somewhere at the events, we usually invite young people by themselves to speak. So, but again, since we don't have enough time today, so I decided quickly just to tell you the story of Stefano from Malawi, who has a disability, and in his community he lost hope to have a career, to have something in his life, and he was totally discouraged to do anything in his life. In 2020, the district where Stefano lived received funding from UNFPA under our Norway-funded program for out-of-school comprehensive sexuality education. And within these funds, our aim in Malawi was to equip young people in these and other districts with knowledge related to sexuality and reproductive health and rights, as well as to train facilitators who will be peer educators in future and who will deliver sexuality education training by themselves. So Stefano became first the student and then the facilitator. Also, he decided to get back to school because like 2 years before that, he left the school because he didn't see any reason to go there. He finished the high school, he received the certificate, and now he is going to continue his training, and he has been enrolled at one of the teachers training college in Malawi. So this is just one story of one person who been involved in our programs, UNFPA supported programs, which we deliver with donor support and together with governments in several countries. So let's go to the next slide. I would like to echo a little bit the presentation of Neil Datta. He mostly spoke about Europe and about the position in the countries of Eastern and Central and Western Europe, but of course it's not only related to one region. So we also meet this opposition in countries where we work. So I will provide you some examples of this opposition in different parts of the world, and then I will provide you some examples how we are trying to work in this situation. Let me start from Colombia. And Colombia, for years, it was very progressive country in terms of comprehensive sexuality education. Unless several years ago, more conservative government, more conservative president took the lead in the country, and we saw some kind of the pushback there related to sexual reproductive health and rights, and including comprehensive sexuality education. There is the Conservative Party led by former president, together with non-governmental and religious actors, who led efforts to confront the peace agreement which was achieved with guerrilla groups in the country. And it's so interesting because peace agreement, it's something about politics, right? It's not about specifically sexual rights, it's not about reproductive rights, it's not about sexuality education. But interestingly, this politician party, they use this political agreement as a reason to push back on sexual reproductive health and rights. So they are arguing that peace agreements promoting the I even can pronounce it, homosexualization of children, gender, the end of family values, and so on. So, as I said, such a case shows that opposition movements are organized to find different entry points to activate their attack on human rights and gender equality agenda. To be more on the positive side, months ago, and I was lucky to be at the time in Colombia, on February 21st, the Constitutional Court made a historic decision against the decriminalization of abortion in Colombia. So the story of Colombia also shows us that it's never, we never be safe when we reach something. So opposition is always trying to get back something from us, and we see that it's always like that. So probably you also know about ISA commitment, the commitment in Eastern and Southern Africa. The commitment of countries to support and to implement programs related to sexual reproductive health and rights of adolescents and young people. This commitment was signed by all countries of this region 10 years ago. And last year, the decision was made to adjust these commitments, to make it more progressive and to re-endorse it. So the idea was that country will recommit to this adjust agenda. And unfortunately, opposition groups and organizations have targeted this process. And it appears that actually it was a catalyst used by conservative groups, specifically from the United States, to mobilize their agendas in African countries and to build popular support against SRHR and CSC at country levels and outside of countries. And unfortunately, they've been successful. They were reaching out they targeted specific politicians, specific people from the government. And at the end of the day, they had, as I said, some success. What we saw in December when the commitment was resigned by countries, not all of them who signed the first commitment did it in December last year. So some of them said that they need more time. Some of them said that they are not agreed with the language. So in fact, like we lost 5 countries. So it was some kind of the successful, unfortunately, outcomes of work of opposition groups. And here we saw another very interesting thing of tactics and strategy of opposition groups. It was like the time of the already of the COVID-19 pandemic. And when we speak about CSC, we always say that on the one of the outcomes of this pandemic was positive because digitalization of education, digitalization of CSC was like facilitated. But also it facilitated digital activities of opposition groups. So they became so advanced in their digital interventions. If you check their websites, if you check their videos, so it's made on the very high level, tech level. So not only us use digital stuff to promote comprehensive sexuality education, but also opposition use it very successfully in their movement as well. So to save our time, I will move to the next slide, where I would like to provide you some examples. Actually, I wanted to provide many examples, but again, I see, so maybe I have 5 or 10 minutes more. So just maybe most interesting of them. So how to implement CSC programs in situation when opposition attacks us? Of course, we have problems in many Muslim countries, but there are some ways to overcome this. For example, in one of the Muslim countries where we implement comprehensive sexuality education, for young men having sex with men and young people who sell sex, we don't we use HIV as an entry point. So of course we don't use this language of sexuality education or gay men or sex workers, because in the context of that Muslim country it's absolutely inappropriate. So we call young gay men, young men at the risk of HIV. We call young people selling sex, young women selling sex, women at the risk of HIV, and we promote and deliver sexuality education programs at the HIV centers. And of course, we, as I said, we did not call it sexuality education, we call it comprehensive prevention program, as well as our partners in the government don't allow us to promote this experience outside of the country. So that's why, unfortunately, I can't name the country right now. Another example from India, we are in agreement among UNFPA and Education Board of Muslim schools at one of the state of India was signed in 2019, and it's open for us the doors of Muslim traditional institutions, where for the young students now we provide assistance and trainings to empower them with accurate, age-appropriate, and culturally relevant information. I think it shows that we can work with even with some religious groups, which traditionally we think never will support SRHR or sexuality education. Also, another strategy to lobby for national policies. And we have some good examples in Malawi, and actually Malawi, I think, is a champion in East and Southern Africa. And in this country, we, UNFPA, support the Safeguard program, which delivered to young people. And based on this program, the national standards were developed and included in the national standards of Malawi of delivering sexuality education. Yeah.
Just a quick time check, if you could wrap up in the next 2 minutes so that we have a little bit of time for questions.
I see. Okay. May we then, yeah. So again, I will tell it like that. So you can go to our website, and we have this on unifpa.org. We have this dedicated page with case studies from countries, and many of them you can find there. If you need more information, you can reach out to me and I will share it with you. Let me just quickly show you the next slide to show what's going on globally with support from Norway. We had this within last 3 years. We implemented the phase 1 of the program, reaching those most left behind through CSC for out of school, where we were implementing the guidance for out of school CSC in 5 countries for specific groups of young people, young indigenous people, young LGBTIQ people, young people with disabilities, young people living with HIV. And now we had a lot of experience, which is ready to be disseminated through other countries and through other regions. And we presented in January a proposal of this phase 2 to donor countries, including Finland. So I rely on your support, those who attend today, that at the level of your country, probably you can promote this proposal, which I also can share with you if you want through email, which really very important for specific groups of young people left behind, because it meets their interests and their needs. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ilya. With this little pitch at the end, I'm handing this over to Saara.
Thank you so much, Daniel and Ilya, for all the insight that you provided here, as well as obviously the work of the UNFPA, which is invaluable in so many ways. We obviously are working here in Finland also towards securing that you have the funding you need also in the future. If you have some questions to our participants, you can post them on the chat, ja voitte kirjoittaa myöskin suomeksi, jos tuntuu helpommalta, niin mä voin kääntää niitä. While we are waiting, if someone has any questions at this point of the evening, I just want to say, first of all, Ilya, about your shirt and what you said in the beginning. Obviously, we stand with you with Ukraine, but also with you and all the Russian human rights defenders who, as yourself said, we know that it's very, very hard conditions, quite impossible conditions that it is to work towards these goals in Russia nowadays. Thanks to Vladimir Putin's and his policies. So obviously all the strengths in that area as well. All that you told here and shared here is very, very topical in Finland as well. We've discussed with our course about sexual education, as you mentioned on previous sessions, and are right at the moment renewing our sexual criminal laws in Finland, and it's very obvious that not just legislation can is enough to provide the security for young girls and for women and for all, but we desperately need good quality comprehensive sexual education. And even though in the Nordic countries, I think the situation is quite good, and the sort of opposition towards CSC is not as strong as in many places in the world, it's still something that we need to work towards here and sort of making it available for all and of good quality. Maybe a comment about the anti-gender movement on this topic. It's obvious that, as you mentioned, if they are not able to turn the clock backwards, they're at least able to stop progress from happening, and that makes me very sad, but also want to sort of work even harder. There are no questions at the moment in the chat, but maybe I could pose one question, which is sort of how should I put it? there were some good examples of what COVID has sort of taught us, and maybe brought with some good things, maybe also some bad things. But do we have sort of a good view already on the impacts of the pandemic on SRHR questions globally? We know that in different crises, it's sadly often the SRHR questions are the ones that are sort of being left behind, and this has obviously been a healthcare crisis. So I think in a lot of countries, maybe there's been some prioritization made that hasn't been very good for maybe SRHR questions. But do you have some knowledge on this sort of area or some data with UNFPA about the big picture of the impacts of COVID on SRHR?
I think the quick answer is probably it's too early to tell. So it's very difficult to have a clear view, because we are still in the middle of the pandemic in many countries, in all of the countries, I would say. What we could say as UNFPA, which we noted very early on in the pandemic, that we saw a rise in gender-based violence, a rise also on child marriage, anecdotally, but nevertheless. So very big concern from UNFPA on that side. We could also see, problems with continuation of services, in particular for SRHR service, but also HIV and AIDS and antiretroviral treatments. So that was a big concern. We have issued guidance here from the headquarters very early on how to adapt services to COVID-19, and so you see which of the services in SRHR can be delayed a little bit. I'm thinking about, for instance, vaccination. HPV vaccination, for instance, was one case where we said that can be done in a year's time, that can be postponed, but others are absolutely critical. I'm talking about maternity care, contraceptives, etc. On the other hand, or on the flip side of that coin, what we are seeing is an opportunity to also rebuild health systems so that they are stronger and more resilient. And in many cases, in many countries, health systems were weak to start with, and were not serving the populations which needed them most, in particular also young people, rural areas. And the digitalization of healthcare is an opportunity for us also to see mHealth, mobile health services. Can that be used more? So we're very hopeful that we also are learning lessons from the COVID pandemic in terms of building back better and building more stronger and more resilient health services going forward, which will deliver better to more people. But again, this is probably at this level a wish, and we are working on this strongly to support countries, of course, to do this. So that would be my very big overall sense. We are working right now, and we're happy to share as soon as they come out on the adolescent front. We will be having we looked at a couple of areas of what happened in COVID. But again, most of these programmatic responses and programmatic stories and anecdotes, we're still waiting to see the full impact in real data, which I think what you are getting at.
Yeah, and if I may to add a couple of things about digitalization. Of course, within the pandemic, we used it more in terms of delivering comprehensive sexuality education programs. But at the same time, so first of all, we realized, so we already may tell now that we can't use only digital apps or programs, so it should be complementary for our in-person face-to-face methods. And unfortunately, we see that how diverse access to equipment, to digital equipment in many countries, adolescents and young people, they just don't have tablets, they don't have smartphones, and it's still effective to use their like traditional media channels. In Malawi, radio lessons were done during the pandemic, and the coverage is like impressive. In Honduras, in Latin America, UNFPA worked with one of the TV station, and the TV show for young people included aspects of sexual reproductive health and messages of CSC. And we found out that in Honduras, many people still watch TV, so not only different apps, etc. So again, we can maybe in later have data globally how COVID affected our SRHR programming, but my point is that it will depend from country to country because each country is unique, and the effects and consequences of COVID-19 will be different.
Thank you. Yeah.
I'm not sure, I still don't see any questions. Then perhaps if you allow me, I would like to bring in my colleague Francelle, who works on abortion in UNFPA, to just give us her
yeah, very shortly, because we are then we are running out of time a little bit. We are a bit over schedule, but just a minute or two. Obviously, very glad to have you all with us. So yeah, go ahead.
Great, thank you for the opportunity, and it's great to be here. So I can just offer kind of broadly the way we work on this topic, very succinctly. I'll try to do that. So as Danielle mentioned, we really work within the framework of the ICPD and the program of action. So our work on abortion focuses really on preventing unintended pregnancies and reducing recourse to abortion, preventing unsafe abortion through initiatives like comprehensive sexuality education, as well as supporting access to safe abortion care to the full extent of national laws and post-abortion care. And just to say that we also approach this issue from a holistic perspective, and we're really elevating the conversation around a comprehensive and integrated package of SRHR interventions as part of universal health coverage. And we see comprehensive abortion care as a part of that package. Thanks.
Thanks so much. Good to have you here too. And I think this is one of the upsides of this digitalization, that we are able to have so many of you with us here today. Maybe that wouldn't be possible if we would have to fly people from all over the world. So very thankful for your input on this course, and I'm sure that all the materials and links that you provide, we will also provide to all the participants of the course, even also those who are not able to be with us here tonight. And also I noticed that Parnil posted an invitation on the chat to do this launch of the State of the Population Report of 2022. So welcome everyone to also follow that. As well as an NGO from Finland is organizing an event on anti-gender movement. But now we are letting you go and going forward in the program. Thank you so much, everyone, friends from the UNFPA and all the friends to your so important work. And now I will switch back to Finnish and try to get my brains to do that as well.
Okay.
So we can
let's disconnect. We say bye-bye, everyone, to Finland. All the best. Bye.
Yes, thanks and bye. Hieman mentiin yliajalle näiden osioiden kanssa, mutta asia oli tietysti mitä mielenkiintoisinta. Aivan loppuhuipennuksena tälle kurssille, jos saamme videon toimimaan, meillä on videohaasteita, mutta kokeillaan. Meidän yksi viime kerran puhujista, Fatim Diarra, joutui valitettavasti perumaan osallistumisensa kurssille, mutta on lähettänyt nyt meille videotervehdyksen ja kuullaan Fatulta vähän esimerkkejä onnistuneesta työstä seksuaalioikeuksien puolesta. Katsotaan, jos saadaan video toimimaan, jos ei, niin sitten lähetetään linkki osallistujille, mutta Laura kokeilee laittaa sen sieltä.
Sanotteko, kuuluuko ääni? Plain.
Joo.
Hei kaikki, mun nimi on Fatim Diarra ja toimin tänä vuonna Naisasialiitto Unionin, eli Suomen vanhimman naisten tasa-arvojärjestön puheenjohtajana sekä sitten vuoroltani Nytkiksen puheenjohtajana. Nytkishän on sitten taas kaikkien poliittisten naisjärjestöjen yhteinen kattojärjestö, ja siellä on niin poliittiset naisjärjestöt sekä sitten Naisasialiitto Unioni sekä naisjärjestöjen keskusliitto jäseninä. Ja mä ajattelin puhua teille pari sanaa siitä, miten yhteistyö saadaan edistettyä seksuaali- ja lisääntymisterveyteen liittyviä kysymyksiä. Mulla on teille 2 esimerkkiä. Ensin haluan puhua teille kuukautisköyhyydestä ja sen jälkeen puhua teille sitten taas tuosta Suomen aborttilainsäädännöstä. Vielä noin pari vuotta sitten meillä oli sellainen tilanne, milloin Suomessa puhuttiin oikeastaan hyvin vähän kuukautisköyhyydestä ja oikeastaan asian ympärillä ei ollut laajamittaista kampanjaa. Me Naisasialiitto Unionissa lähdettiin liikenteeseen tämän asian kanssa ja tehtiin tällainen #puhutaan menkoista -kampanja ja alettiin puhumaan menkoista ja kuukautisista. Siinä keskustelussa nousi myös esille kuukautistuotteiden arvonlisävero ja se, miten se on edelleen Suomessa oikeastaan valtaisan korkea. Ja varsinkin kun verrataan muihin Euroopan unionin maihin, niin Suomessa kuukautis- sekä inkontinenssituotteita verrataan ihan niin kuin mitä tahansa hupituotetta. Vähän niin kuin vaikka tämä mun mekkoa, samalla arvonlisäveroasteella. Ja sehän on ihan hölmöläisten hommaa, sillä eihän kuukautistuotteet ole mitään hupituotteita, ei inkontinenssituotteet ole mitään hupituotteita, vaan ne on kaikille menstruoiville ihmisille itse asiassa vallan niin kuin tärkeitä ja itse asiassa pakollisia tuotteita jopa. Ja tämän takia me ajatellaan, että nehän pitää sitten rinnastaa lääkkeisiin ja muihin tämmöisiin niin kuin pakollisiin tarpeisiin. No se, mitä me sitten tehtiin, on se, että me alettiin ottamaan yhteyttä tuolla Naisasialiitto Unionissa poliittisiin naisjärjestöihin ja ruvettiin haastamaan poliittisia naisjärjestöjä siitä, että hei, teillä on tulossa puoluekokous, pitäisikö teidän tehdä aloite siitä, että saataisiin teidän puolueen poliittiseen tavoiteohjelmaan tavoite siitä, että kuukausituotteiden arvonlisäveroa lasketaan. Ja meidän iloksi naisjärjestöthän tarttu tähän kiinni, joka johti sitten siitä, että eri isoissa puolueissa Suomessa kannat muuttui ja kannoiksi kirjattiin se, että kuukautis- ja inkontinenssituotteiden arvonlisävero pitää laskea sinne samalle tasolle lääkkeiden ja muiden tuommoisten tarpeiden kanssa. Ja siinä juurikin mahtavaa oli se, että jos unioni olisi vain ikään kuin itse huutanut tai yksin jossain nurkassa, niin tämä asiahan ei olisi tapahtunut. Vaan sillä, että naisjärjestöt yhdessä, tasa-arvojärjestöt yhdessä puhuivat ja keskustelivat, ikään kuin kirittivät toisiaan ja tsemppasivat toisiaan tekemään tällaisia aloitteita, niin sillä me saatiin vallan suuri muutos tapahtumaan poliittisten puolueiden ohjelmissa. Ja se oli kyllä niin kuin jotenkin valtavan niin kuin riemastuttava asia. Sen jälkeen puhun teille Oma tahto-kampanjasta. Me tehtiin tällainen kansalaisaloitekampanja nimeltä Oma tahto. Ja Oma tahto-kampanjan viestihän ja tavoite on se, että saadaan uudistettua Suomen aborttilainsäädäntöä sillä tavalla, että Suomen aborttilainsäädäntö tunnistaa raskaan olevan henkilön, naisen tai muun sukupuolisen ihmisen oman tahdon siinä raskauden keskeytystilanteessa. Meillähän on Suomessa sellainen kummallinen tilanne, että silloin kun meidän aborttilainsäädäntö tehtiin, niin se oli hirvittävän progressiivinen. Se oli yksi Euroopan unionin progressiivisimmista ja parhaiten naisten oikeudet tunnistavista lainsäädännöistä. No, sitten aika kului eteenpäin. Ja nyt on vuosi 2022 ja meidän lainsäädäntö on auttamattomasti aivan liian vanha. Se on tehty siis niin kuin 70-luvulla, eli se on niin kuin valtavan vanhanaikainen ja siinä vaaditaan siis edelleen kahden lääkärin lausunto siihen, että ihminen saa raskauden keskeytyksen sekä sitten raskauden keskeytystä pyytävä henkilö joutuu perustelemaan tämän raskauden keskeytystä, eli kertomaan minkä takia. Eli siinä ei oikeastaan tunnisteta sitä niin kuin itsemääräämisoikeutta. Ja kun me verrataan Suomen lainsäädäntöä, niin me nähdään se, että itse asiassa muissa niin kuin moderneissa maissa, paitsi niissä, missä on vahva tämmöinen uskollinen vakaumus, missä abortti on kielletty, niin lähdetään liikenteeseen juuri siitä, että se yhden lääkärin lausunto sekä sitten se naisen oma tahto riittää siihen, että saa tämän raskauden keskeytyksen. No, me lähdettiin tekemään tämä aloitetta, jos me tiedettiin, että kysymys ei ole mikään radikaali juttu, niin me lähdettiin ottamaan yhteyttä erilaisiin järjestöihin. Otettiin yhteyttä naisjärjestöihin, mutta koska me puhutaan lääketieteen piirissä olevasta asiasta, niin me ajateltiin, että hartioiden pitää olla vielä leveämmät. Joten me oltiin sitten yhteydessä Suomen gynekologiliittoon ja oltiin yhteydessä Kätilöliittoon ja sitten myös Lääkäriliittoon. Ja he kaikki oli meidän kanssa samaa mieltä, että itse asiassa tämä tämmöinen kahden lääkärin vaatimus on turha ja nöyryyttävä. Ja lähti sitten mukaan meidän kanssa tekemään tätä kampanjaa. Se, minkä takia me haluttiin saada tähän juurikin nämä lääketieteen asiantuntijat mukaan, johtui siitä, että jos asia ei tunne ja ajattelee vaan, että no kyllähän se on hyvä, että siinä on 2 lääkäriä, niin silloin jää pois se tieto siitä niin kuin todellisuudesta. Eli silloin, kun tämä laki tehtiin, niin raskauden keskeytys tehtiin sillä tavalla, että se oli kirurginen operaatio. Eli mentiin sinne sairaalaan ja tehtiin siellä se. Mutta nytten me ei enää eletä semmoisessa maailmassa ja lääketiede on kehittynyt, ihmisten tietotaso on myös kasvanut. Eli raskaus keskeytetään niin kuin lääkkeillä ja siihen ei enää tarvita niin kuin medikaalista operaatio, missä ihminen joutuu menemään sinne sairaalaan. Ja lääkärit oli meidän kanssa samaa mieltä, että tällainen pitäisi ehdottomasti saada. Gynekologit oli samaa mieltä ja kätilöt oli meidän kanssa samaa mieltä. Ja sitten me yhdessä heidän kanssaan kirjoitettiin tämä aloite ja sitten pyydettiin mukaan Väestöliittoa, pyydettiin mukaan Amnestyä ja kaikki järjestöt lähti itse asiassa siihen mukaan. Ja sitten kun meillä oli vahvat leveät olkapäät, niin me lähdettiin yhdessä tekemään tätä kampanjaa. Tämän kampanjan suunnittelu kesti yhteensä, mä sanoisin semmoisen puolisen vuotta me suunniteltiin tätä kansalaisaloitekampanjaa, sillä välillä ihmisen ajatus siitä, että kirjoitetaan vaan tämmöinen niin kuin kampanja, tämmöinen kansalaisaloite, laitetaan se nettiin, avot homma on hoidettu. Mutta niin ei tehdä onnistuneita kampanjoita. Onnistuneita niin kuin tasa-arvoon ja yhdenvertaisuuteen liittyviä niin kuin tämmöisiä kansanliikkeitä, ne pitää rakentaa. Ja yleensä jos sulla on argumentit kunnossa ja sulla on ihmiset siinä mukana, niin saat kyllä hyvän kampanjan tehtyä. Ja me siis tehtiin se somessa, tehtiin se hyvin jaettavaksi ja kaikki järjestöt lähti samaan aikaan, samana päivänä jakamaan sitä viestiä ja nopeasti me saatiinkin nimet siihen kerättyä. Sen jälkeen me tavattiin erilaisia poliittisia puolueita eduskunnassa ja saatiin paljon vihreätä valoa. Ja näihin tapaamisiin pyydettiin mukaan ihmisiä aina myös monesta eri järjestöstä. Eli sillä tavalla, että me osoitettiin se, että tässä itse asiassa ei ole kysymys pelkästään niin kuin naisjärjestöistä, vaan tässä on niin kuin laaja yhteiskunnallinen tuki. Ja mun ajatus on kyllä vahvasti sellainen, että kun me tehdään yhdessä, me saadaan enemmän aikaiseksi, sillä ihmisoikeustyö on lopulta kuitenkin meidän aivan kaikkien työtä.
Kiitokset täältä Fatulle, joka ei ole linjoilla, mutta etänä välitämme ne henkisesti perille. Musta tärkeä viesti myöskin tähän loppuun ja toivottavasti vähän sellainen kohottava ajatus siitä, että asiat voi mennä eteenpäin, vaikka se on haastavaa, että yhteistyö on siihen kyllä A ja O. Jos teillä on mielen päällä sellaisia kokemuksia tai ajatuksia, joita tämä kurssi on herättänyt, joita haluatte jakaa muiden kanssa, niin puhun tässä vielä pari minuuttia ja voitte kirjoittaa niitä tuonne chatin puolelle. Vielä tuohon Fatun puheenvuoroon liittyen, meillä tosiaan tuo oma tahto kansalaisaloite on eduskunnan käsittelyssä parhaillaan ja sitten liittyen noin kuukautissuojan olen itsekin tehnyt niistä kirjallista kysymystä ja valtiopäivä toimii eduskunnassa ja toivon mukaan se on asia, joka myös voi jossain vaiheessa edetä. Haluan kiittää teitä kaikkia kurssille osallistumisesta ja toivottavasti se on ollut sitä, mitä toivoitte ja odotitte. Tavoitteenahan oli antaa tietoa, motivaatiota, inspiraatiota tehdä työtä seksuaalioikeuksien puolesta. Kyse on tosi perustavanlaatuisista oikeuksista, jotka luo perustaa oikeastaan muulle inhimilliselle kehitykselle. Näistä aiheista puhuminen ei ole aina ihan helpointa. Jos kertoo puolustavansa vaikka tyttöjen oikeuksia, niin aika harva vastustaa. Kaikkien on helppo olla tyttöjen puolella, mutta heti jos me aletaan puhua kuukautisista, raskauksista, endometrioosista, aborteista, seksuaali- ja sukupuolivähemmistöjen oikeuksista, seksuaalikasvatuksesta, niin homma menee heti pykälän verran vaikeammaksi. Ja moni sen takia politiikassakin toimiva jättää sitten puhumatta. Ja sen takia me tarvitaan ihmisiä kaikille yhteiskunnan tasolle ja ihan sinne omaan arkeen, jotka uskaltaa puhua näistä asioista, jotka on pitkään yhteiskunnassa ehkä ollut vähän tabuja tai jotenkin noloja tai hävettyjä tai hankalia, ja normalisoida niitä, mutta myös tinkimättömästi puolustaa niitä. Työhän meillä ei lopu, eikä varmaan tule koskaan valmiiksi. Me on tänään kuultu siitä, että aika järjestäytynyttä voimakastakin vastustusta näille asioille on kansainvälisesti ja myös Suomessa. Ja voi olla, että kun otetaan askelia eteenpäin jossain, niin tulee takapakkia toisaalla ja sen takia työ jatkuu. Ja toisaalta me tiedetään, että näiden asioiden puolesta on kamppailtu jo vuosikymmenten ajan. Mehän kaikki, jotka tänä päivänä tehdään tasa-arvotyötä seksuaalioikeuksien puolesta, niin me seistään edellisten sukupolvien harteilla ja rakennetaan tavallaan sen työn päälle. Ne on asioita, joita ei voi pitää itsestäänselvyytenä. Edistystä ei voi pitää itsestäänselvyytenä, vaan sen puolesta pitää todellakin jaksaa kamppailla. Joten toivon, että täältä jokainen saa voimaa ja inspiraatiota levittää tietoisuutta seksuaalioikeuksista ja tavoista puolustaa niitä lähestyttävällä otteella, sellaisella otteella, että kutsutaan kaikki muutkin mukaan tekemään tätä työtä, mutta tietysti tinkimättömästi. Ja ainakin minuun saan olla yhteydessä, jos näihin asioihin liittyen jotain ideoita tai kysymyksiä. Teen itse näiden parissa, jos sen päivittäin, niin ainakin viikoittain töitä täällä eduskunnassa. Ja toisaalta tämä on tietysti myös sellainen tematiikka, joka ulottuu ihan jokaiselle päätöksenteon tasolle ja myöskin sitten monissa järjestöissä näiden asioiden puolesta voi tehdä hommia. Kiitos vielä kaikille. Luen vielä chatista, mitä sinne on tullut. Siellä on tosiaan noita linkkejä. Laura toivottavasti ottaa niitä talteen, niin voidaan myöskin välittää niitä kaikille osallistujille. Niin näihin voi palata ja tosiaan materiaalit tulee myöskin osallistujille jakoon, nämä kurssikerrat ja muut. Ja vähän jopa haikeaa on, että tämä on nyt loppu, koska näitä torstai-iltoja on ollut tosi mukava viettää tällä porukalla ja huippuasiantuntijoiden parissa. Pahoittelut vielä, että mentiin 5 minuuttia yliajalle, mutta mukavaa, että näin moni pystyi kuitenkin kuuntelemaan loppuun saakka. Suuret kiitokset ja mukavaa viikon jatkoa kaikille.
Iso kiitos myös Vision puolesta ja kiitos Saara. Tämä jää hetkeksi vielä päälle, kun mä otan täältä noita linkkejä.